Hi, my name is Bruce Barkauer with the Center for Faith and Giving in Indianapolis, Indiana. I have the privilege of serving as the Minister for Faith and Giving for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. And I'm working on the checkbook right now and trying to bring a little order to the chaos of the numbers. And I don't know if that's ever been your experience or not, but that is for most of us something that's required for us to do on a regular basis, is keep a tab on our finances. What's happening with the resources that we have been entrusted with, and how are we doing at managing them? Bringing order is a great biblical theme, and in fact, most everything we do at the Center for Faith and Giving, we generally find a biblical reason for doing it. I think of order as being that of the first stories within the sacred text of the First Testament, when we hear God calling order to the swirling chaos, to the mishmash, to the tohu vabohu, the Hebrew says, of the earth, and it's formless and void, and God speaks order and begins to separate light from darkness and finds this to be pleasing. And then God separates the waters from the waters, and the waters from the dry land, and in the dome over the earth places sun, moon, and stars, so that there is an ordering of the day and the night and the seasons and the progression of time and the years, in a way to mark those for the purpose of there being order. And from this order that God is imaginatively creating and calling forth come swimming things in the seas, and winged things in the sky, and creeping things on the ground. And God is pleased with all of this, and God then calls forth human creatures to rule in the earth the way that God rules in the cosmos, that there might be order, and that order is carried forth and established. And God delights in all of this, and there is such an abundance, such a wealth of everything that there is, that folks can work 6 days but get 7 days worth of produce. That in the same way that God rested after 6 days of creating the creatures in the creation, and the land itself after periods of time get rest and renewal, and there's enough to carry them over until it's time for the cycle to start again. This ordering of the world, it is a part of the DNA, the footprint, the blueprint of the world in which we live, as we experience it through our faith and the biblical witness, that it's important that things have order. And we know this in our life. We know this was true in the ancient world, that there was an order to keep the chaos at bay in a world without a lot of scientific knowledge, where many things that we take for granted occurred as mysterious forces. There was a desire to nail down everything you could in the way in which things work, to keep the chaos at bay and from overrunning society and civilization. At the time of Jesus, there was a very clear order of things. Caesar was at the top, and the enslaved people of the Roman Empire were down at the bottom someplace. That was the lucky ones, who were the men. Below that, of course, were the women and the children, who were at the very bottom of the social strata. But everybody knew that's how the way the world worked. Right or wrong, everybody operated with the same sense of information. And it seemed to work for the folks of that time. In the New Testament, we see one of these household codes preserved for us, the way in which the house was to be ordered and structured, so that the woman submitted to the man. The husband and wife, though, had this unique relationship because the husband loved the wife the way that Christ loved the church, and the children submitted to the parents, and masters to slaves. Now, slaves to masters, rather. We might take issue with how that structure is. It might not be the way that we would want the world ordered today, but it was a way of keeping chaos in check in the ancient world, and it's preserved for us there in the scripture in Ephesians, is that household code. In other places in the First and Second Testament, we get elements of these codes for us that help us to see how it is that by observing them, the social structure stays in place and there's less anxiety for folks in the church. When leadership was being called, Timothy says that in the ordering of the church, those who are placed in leadership shall have certain qualities and characteristics. And so for clergy and church leaders, this is especially directed to you and very important. We know that, a temperate, sensible, respectable, hospitable, an apt teacher, not a lover of wine, that these are things that were in the household code for the elder, and that they were to be not violent but gentle in the way in which they managed the church. Not quarrelsome and not a lover of money. Money was not to be a driving force in their lives. The elder, the bishop, must manage their household well, keeping their children submissive and respectful in every way, because if someone can't manage the household, says Timothy, then how can they manage the household of God? So for clergy and lay leadership, this issue of order is important to us. If you are in a church that hasn't updated its bylaws and constitution in the last 40 years, these very words of Scripture may be the description of the duties of the office of elder and the qualifications necessary to elect a person to that office. That they be thought of well by outsiders, that they would not fall into disgrace and give the church a bad name. These were important understandings of how life should be ordered. For deacons, it was the same sort of list, with the exception of hospitality and teaching. Pretty much everything else is there. Manage their children and their households well. For those who serve well as deacons gain good standing for themselves and great boldness in the faith that is in Jesus Christ, in 1 Timothy. Titus echoes these same standards about being temperate, serious, prudent, which later is unpacked as having self-control and being good managers of the household and kind, that these are folks who are well disciplined. And when we talk about bringing order to our household, and particularly to our personal finance, we are talking about discipline. And we're talking about something that is really very important. Other places, the scriptures tell us about why it's important that we live as self-controlled people, not giving in fully to our passions and pleasures, but that we lived in a disciplined and orderly way to reflect well upon Christ and the faith, and to not be distracted from the mission that is ours to share the good news of the gospel. And so these are foundational pieces, if you will, about where we're going to move as we think about ordering our financial household. We're simply making the argument that there's scriptural evidence that it's important to do this. Jesus himself, in Luke's gospel, when talking about the cost of discipleship, when giving those very critical words, take up the cross and follow me, goes on then to parabolically talk about this. For which of you intending to build a tower does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether or not he is able to finish? Because otherwise, once he's laid a foundation and he can't finish, others will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and cannot finish what he started. I had a living example of that in the 1980s when I lived in Lexington, Kentucky. I was working for a radio station there, and our transmitter and studios were right next to this huge castle. It really was a castle with giant walls of huge stone block with towers, turrets on the sides of the corners. And the person building it went bankrupt. And it was not finished for many, many, many years until someone else came in and picked up where they left off. and built a home inside of its very large and hard to miss walls. But for many, many years, that person was a subject of conversation, and not in the kindest and most polite way, because they had overreached. There's a whole reality TV series about a real estate developer couple who I believe are from Florida, who were trying to basically create an American version of the Palace of Versailles based on their wants and desires to have this huge thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of square foot palatial home. And lo and behold, the recession hit and they went bankrupt and they were unable to finish. I understand that because the economy has improved, they're starting again, but it is far from completion, and a lot can happen between now and then. It would sort of be, I wonder if Jesus, when saying this now, wouldn't say, now what person would go out and buy a fully loaded SUV without first figuring out whether or not the bank would be taking it away in 3 months because he couldn't make the payments, and hadn't calculated all the costs, you know, the insurance and the maintenance and the gasoline it takes to run it. Who knows? But I think it's legitimate to begin with that foundational understanding. And the discipline around money, even Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians relative to the offering for the saints in Jerusalem. Paul says, each Lord's Day, let each one set aside an amount that he or she has determined, and then when I arrive, you'll have that amount well in hand, ready for me to take to the saints in Jerusalem. In other words, even the gift of the practice of generosity, the act of stewardship for the benefit of the mission of the church and for the benefit of the saints who were in need, this action was not an afterthought. It wasn't reach in your wallet and take out what's left at the beginning of that day based on what you didn't spend last night. It's a very disciplined, thought about, ordered approach that it's thought out and is a task that's taken seriously. And I think all of this matters to us in our discussion. First of all, because Paul, of course, reminds us we're ambassadors for Jesus Christ. And having our fiscal house in order is important. If we are a pastor or a church leader and we have a reputation around town of not paying our bills, that doesn't reflect well on the church, and it would lead people to wonder, how is it that that individual is managing their role and responsibility in the church? What kind of financial shape is the church in if they're the treasurer, the pastor, or the board chair? There's a matter of personal accountability here, that I own my responsibility, that I will honor the commitments that I make, and that I'm prepared to do that because I have planned for this. Because it's all based, you know, the generosity piece of this, the building the capacity to give generously from what we have, is based on an understanding that that makes a difference, that we want to have the capacity to be generous because it can change the world. It can transform individuals and communities and societies, that it matters. I suppose another reason we want to talk about this is because, well, let's be honest, if you're in a household that's more than yourself, money can be a huge source of conflict. I know that in the many years I served as a parish pastor, when I counseled couples who were having trouble in their marriage and having issues in the family, money was often one of the great sources of conflict. Not always the one we could first identify, but as we worked our way through, decisions that had been made about money, either separately or together, that had not been well thought out and had added burden to and stress to the relationship, and they needed to be solved, and money was an issue. You know, I always understood in the counseling I did as a pastor that money, sex, and how to raise the children were the three things couples were most likely to fight about, and when one of those things was amiss, the other two were probably in jeopardy, sort of like a three-legged stool. And let's be honest, if we have our household in order, if we have our fiscal house in order, we're going to have peace. we are not going to be anxious. We are not going to be fearful that the very essentials that we have identified that we need in the Western world to live a safe and secure life won't be at risk, that we will have a home and it will be insured. We will have food to eat and it will be good, healthy food, that we will have clothes to wear, and that we will have our utilities paid so we can stay warm. That these things, we'll have transportation to get to our job, whether that's taking the car that we have been able to purchase, or whether it's using public transportation. We'll have the money to ride the bus or to make the car payment, to put gas in the car, so that we can keep with our vocation and have the resources we need. That we will have money saved in the event of the unforeseen. If we are in that situation, we sleep better at night. We are not nearly as anxious. I suppose Dave Ramsey calls it financial peace for a reason. That it's important to have this part of our life disciplined and working well in order for us to not be in fear, to not worry about being in need, because those things inhibit our generosity and they make life difficult. Now, where did I learn what I'm about to talk to you about? Well, I have to be honest with you. While I have read the books of financial experts and went to school and had a business minor, so I had economics and accounting, and I have some understanding of how all of this works. Long before I went to school, my father sat down at a kitchen table not unlike this one and explained to me the world of money and personal economics and personal finance, in how to be disciplined about it, and I've not forgotten it. I've not always applied everything as well as I probably should have. There are some things about which my father was a stickler about, which I tend not to be as anxious about, but the things that he taught me made sense. So I'm going to take you to the Ken Barkauer School of Economics for a minute. Dad's been gone for many years, but not forgotten, and the lessons learned are among the many gifts that he left my brother and I in how to live our lives. Dad's number one rule: don't spend more than you make. Golly, that seems so logical and so simple, but if you don't know what you make and you don't know what you're spending, you can get there pretty darn quickly. Would that the federal government could learn not to spend more than you make. Think of the anxiety that hangs over us because of that decision. So it only makes sense that at our own kitchen table, we would have the discipline to not spend more than we make. In fact, my father was very clear that not only do you not spend more than you make, you don't spend all that you make. That your income and your outgo every month should not be equal. That you should be saving. My father's rule was pay yourself first, that you should set aside. His rule was about 10 to 15% of money for savings. He was much better at that than I've been, but I know that that's a part of what we need to be doing in our household, is putting aside money in savings. I would adjust that now to say that my charitable contributions, particularly those to the church, feel like the first check I should write every month. But right behind that should be the check to my savings account, if you will, the electronic transfer that sets money aside. Dad said, build a budget. And here's how you do it. You have to know what you've got and what you owe, because that's how you avoid going over rule number one. And Dad believed you should balance your checkbook every month down to the penny, and he and my mother did that faithfully behind a closed door. out of the earshot most of the time of my brother and I. They sat down together and they did that right down to the penny. Now, I don't know that you need to do it down to the penny these days and fret over that quite so much, though it would be good if you did. Down to the nearest $10 for most of us would be pretty good if we did it every month. And if we're living on the margin, then down to the nearest dollar probably makes a lot of sense, because fees for bouncing checks, overdrafts add up pretty quickly, and they're pretty senseless money to spend. And not only does the bank charge you, but usually the place you've overdrafted to charges you, and you just don't need to be there. And sometimes it's over just a few dollars. So if you've balanced your checkbook and you've paid attention, you know what you have in there, you're not likely to swipe that debit card on a number that's too big. Part of this process is setting priorities. I listed what I think are the prime priorities for most of us. We want to have a home or a place to live, whether it's an apartment or a home or a townhouse or however we're doing it. We want a roof over our heads, and we need to pay for that. And the insurance that protects that investment or our goods in that dwelling. We want to eat. We want to have clothing and be able to keep warm and have our utilities work, be able to keep cool in the summertime, have transportation, have health insurance, have money set aside for pension. In other words, we've got to prioritize what are the first things that we do with the money we receive before we get down to that would be nice to have, we want, but we don't necessarily need list. Another piece of my father's advice that I have tried to live very hard by is not to pay interest. Dad always felt that was unnecessary. I only remember my father owing interest on the home mortgage. Dad was so disciplined that he was able to pay cash for his vehicles and had a new car about every 4 years. I've not been that good at it, but I have tried hard to find the best interest rates that I can and to keep my credit rating at a place where I'm eligible for the best interest rate possible. And to take advantage of free money, as I call it. If somebody's going to lend me money for 60, 90, 120 days, as long as I make my payments on time, and as long as those payments don't put me over rule number 1, I do those things and don't pay interest. Dad was very disciplined about planning for emergencies. My father, honestly, was not the most optimistic and cheery person you might have ever met. He was a good person. But Dad figured if something bad could happen, it most likely would, and it would be worse than what you thought was the worst thing that could happen. So Dad prepared for emergencies. Dad, aside from a savings plan, had additional money set aside for the transmission or the furnace or the hot water heater or the roof, the broken leg. You know, Dad was ready for that. Dad planned for retirement, not just his pension, not just Social Security, but my father invested and did so very well. A great discipline. Again, one that I've not been quite as successful at, but I have tried to pay attention to having additional money set aside for retirement and trying to do that because it matters. And retirement's getting closer for me every year. And I'm looking forward to it, and I want to have enough money to be able to play golf and travel a little bit for my wife and I to be able to enjoy ourselves and to not be anxious about money. And the time, of course, to prepare for retirement is not at age 60-something. It's at age 20-something, if you're fortunate enough to be in that place and being able to develop that discipline now. But even in your 50s, it's not too late to start setting stuff aside and being ready. Another thing that my father was known for was not paying full price for anything. Back before online sales were a thing that you could do, where the price pretty much does seem to be fixed, though you can certainly shop very competitively. My father just wouldn't really pay full price for much of anything. And he was good at it. He always had kind of an angle into the conversation. And particularly for larger items, you know, lawnmowers, washing machines, certain home repairs, etc., where you need to bring in a skilled craftsman. Dad Dad found a way to not pay what the initial price was. And what he taught me was that most things are negotiable, and the worst thing that anybody can say to you is no. But they might say yes, and you might save 10%, and 10% on $100 is $10, and that could buy you a decent lunch someplace. And that was sort of his philosophy. If you are married, if you have a spouse or significant other with whom you share life, this is all work that you should do together as a couple. The burden shouldn't fall on one or the other, and both persons should know exactly where you stand, exactly how much you have coming in, exactly how much you have committed going out, and to have arrived at the plan for spending the money that doesn't go to those things generally together. That doesn't mean you can't have an allowance for which you're only partially accountable, but that on all the major things, this should be done together as a couple. And for heaven's sakes, you need to know, what are the passwords to the accounts? What do we owe? What life insurance do we have? What protection do we have in terms of automobile insurance, life insurance, health insurance, homeowners insurance? What are those things? Where is that information kept? Both parties should have 100% knowledge of that. Because life is uncertain, and it is possible that someone doesn't come home from work today or doesn't get up tomorrow morning. As difficult as those things are for us to imagine, they happen. And we don't want to leave ourselves in a position where we've left the other person vulnerable because we weren't inclusive in the way in which we did this very important work. So this is something to do together. Watching this video is something to do together, but please don't go, if you're watching this alone, and say, hey, you need to watch this. Find a little nicer way to do that, to engage this material together and thinking together. But that's kind of the Ken Barkauer School of Economics, and I have to confess it served me well. Some would say, well, that's pretty much what Dave Ramsey teaches. Well, Dave must have been hanging around our kitchen and heard my father, because before I ever heard of who Dave Ramsey was, these were things that I learned. When I talk about couples doing these things together, it's fun to remember that Sally Poplin once wrote, some couples go over their budgets very carefully every month, and others just go over them. Little humor never hurts, folks. A budget tells us what we can't afford, but William Feather reminds us it does not keep us from buying it. That's self-discipline in all of this. Relative to our budget, Keith Davis said, we didn't actually overspend our budget. The allocation simply fell short of our expenditure. That's the government for you. And this is what we want to avoid in our own households. Now, it's important you should know that there is a game out there to separate you from your hard-earned money. And understanding that game can help you practice discipline. Once you've established a budget, and shortly we're going to go over how you do that and all the components of that, but more as a way of preparing us for that and laying a foundation for how we live within that budget once we've created it, is understanding that the whole game out there in our free market economy is to free you from your money. And we need to understand how that works. And when it comes to money itself, we need to understand what is its moral value for us. How does it function for us? How does it help us understand who we are? What's our relationship with money? Is it a healthy relationship, or is it not so healthy? Do we tend to see our own value tied up in how much money we have or how much stuff we have acquired? Do we see money as power, as in terms of in organizations like the church we belong to, that the size of our contribution should somehow get us more votes or influence at the table? How does money work? Because, you know, in the Gospels, money itself is essentially value neutral. It's what we do with the money that matters. So what do you do with it? How do you understand how you function with what you have to work with? Do you understand it to all be yours? You've earned it, it's yours, and you can do with it what you like? Or have you earned it within a social system and structure that means you have received some benefit for some things you did not necessarily initially contribute to, and that for the well-being of the community you continue to contribute to these things to foster them not only for your use but for those who come after you? This can be true of a church building or the highways that run through your town, you see. So how does money function? Is it all yours, or in a social network and fabric, is there a communal dimension to some of our resources? In a religious context, we might ask, is it ever really ours? Or does everything belong to God and we manage what we have received, understanding that we're not its final owner? This is not a perpetuity deed in the sense I don't get to take it with me. And so does that change how I understand money and what I do with it and what my responsibilities are with the resources I have? A good conversation to have and to think about, and when we do this class in a group live, I ask students to talk about how money was handled in their home. And getting at how they understand money, to share with one another what their first memory of is the first job they had that they got paid for, that wasn't just their allowance. And what did they do with that money? Were they saving it? Did it just go right into the gas tank of a car, or into clothes for date night? I mean, what did they do with the money? How much money did they earn? And did they give any of it away? Did they save any of it? Was it being used, you know, for put aside some of it for the future, for a college education or a home or a car? It's good to talk with your spouse about these things, to have these conversations, because you may see that you have had very different experiences that shape who you are and what you think about money because of how you were brought up in the environment in which you were raised. And you may begin to discover why this conversation is difficult, and begin then to find ways, when you have some self-understanding and then understand the other person's journey, how to reach compromise and talk about what's underneath the anxiety we may feel. And to talk together about what are your goals. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, where do you want to be? I'm hopeful that in the next 10 to 15 years I'll be able to retire. And my wife and I are starting to talk about, well, where do we want to do that? Obviously we want to be close to the grandchildren, at least part of the year, but maybe we would like to be someplace, if the grandchildren are in a cold climate, where it isn't cold all the time. I want to be able to play golf. 12 months of the year would be ideal for me. That's a recreational hobby for me, and I'm a terrible player, but I enjoy the sport. It gets me outside and gets me walking and clears my head. What do you want to do? Where do you want to be? What do you want to be able to do with your life going forward? And where you put your money now will really influence what you're able to do in the future. And probably one of the most important conversations you can have, probably need to think about it individually and then have the conversation with your spouse or your significant other, is what's enough? How much is enough? Is it enough to have a home? Is it enough to be able to simply afford the payments for that home? Or how much do we need to have in savings? How many cars do we really need to have? How many Longaberger baskets do we really need to own? That could be a sore subject in my household, and maybe in yours as well. And so we need to come to some common understanding. We need to understand what's enough for us. Because when we figure that out, then we can figure out how much we need, and then maybe how much we can share and give away, and how much we can save, and how much we can utilize in ways that build up and enrich our families and our society. There's a question you have to ask yourself, and that is, have you been infected with affluenza? Tony Campolo calls it affluenza, the disease that is the desire to acquire, that for no necessary reason or purpose, not because we necessarily need it, but because we just want to have it and we want to have more of it, we just keep going out and getting stuff and packing our places full. I have a person who lives in my neighborhood who I think it's an illness that you can tell that there are not many places to walk in that house. They have acquired many things, and they are hoarding those things in a way that seems to me to be very unhealthy. And I suspect that they don't have a clear sense of what enough is. And while our hoarding may not be that dramatic, we may be hoarding nonetheless in ways that are unhealthy to us spiritually. So we need to have that conversation to understand money, and to understand that money, and sometimes more so the lack of it, really does reveal our character. Once we have that in place, then we can begin to get to some of these other pieces that I think are important to our personal understanding. Now, I said there are games to separate us from our money, so let me talk about a few of those. Do you understand what it is that makes you want to buy stuff? Are you an impulse buyer? Folks at McDonald's figured this out a long time ago. You want fries with that? Or if you've ordered a meal deal, do you want to supersize that? Well, I supersized a few too many. And maybe you have too, because I just kind of gave in, well, it's only 50 cents more, only $1.25 more. And I didn't need it. I had enough already. You see that candy bar at the grocery store in the checkout line. They didn't put it there by accident. They're looking for the impulse buyer, and the person who is open to the power of suggestion, either verbally or visibly. Sometimes they get at us other ways to get us to buy things. Don't you want the best for your family? Aren't you entitled to the best? Don't you deserve the best? Now they're playing to our ego, you see. A reward for our hard work. Show everybody else that you have arrived. Now pride is involved, folks. Drive that big old Cadillac around, even though you're not making a salary that can afford it, because people will think that you have made it. And don't we want people to be impressed with us? Well, I hope not, but that happens, Nameplates and addresses can become oddly important to us. The name of our brokerage firm, the name that's on our car can sometimes kind of fool us into thinking we are, or others into something that maybe we are not. To not be defined by these things. How important is it to have those things? What is it that plays to our wanting and desiring those things when many of us really can't afford them? I love the salesman, good salesman. My father taught sales, so I learned these early on. What if I told you you could drive that home today? What if I told you could have that today, interest-free for 2 years? We can have that at your home tomorrow morning. You can have ice cubes out of that new refrigerator for your iced tea at lunch tomorrow. We'll give it to you 12 months interest free. Now, I said earlier, I like that kind of a deal, but for God's sake, don't miss one payment. Or you pay a penalty, interest goes back to the day they first walked it out of the showroom with you, and you will be very sorry you made that deal. But it's a way to try and close the deal. Well, no, you don't have the money right now, but you'll have it next month. So I trust you. Go ahead and sign right here, please. Or one of my favorites, if you don't do this today, this offer won't be good. When you walk out the door, I bought a gym membership that way once. You can see how well I used it. It was many, many years ago. And I didn't know, you know, I'm a little ignorant still, and I got hooked by that one. You know, they were offering me such a deal. Well, I ended up paying way more than I could afford for something I really didn't need and ended up not using. And then I moved, and the gym membership wasn't good anyplace else. I would not make that mistake again. But that's out there. Or if you buy this today, we'll throw this in the deal. See, they add just a little sweetener to try and entice you. Or you know, my favorite, well, do you like the red one or the green one? Which one do you want? You know, they already get you talking about basically having it, and then it's hard not to and to walk away. So do you understand those games, you know? The odds they're stacked against you. People have spent a lot of money figuring out how to separate you from your hard-earned money. I mean, they've spent millions of dollars right down to the color of the packaging. You know, the Super Bowl ads that run and cost millions of dollars, you know, people wouldn't pay for them if they didn't think they weren't getting results. They continue to charge millions of dollars for these. And they've got people watching the ads, and they're measuring their body temperature, their body chemistry, blood pressure, heart rate, where their eyes go on the screen. Do they get a little sweat? Do they get a little choked up? What is it that motivates people? You're working against folks who are highly trained to motivate you to do what they want you to do. End caps in the grocery store. Often not a good deal if you do the math, but they've got them right there, and they got a big sign on them that says, you know, $1.98 or 2 for $5 or whatever. And they want you to believe. If you look at the dates on that, you might find some of that stuff's going to expire really soon. And if you're going to use it, that's fine. But pay attention to that stuff. But people, you know that the manufacturers pay thousands of dollars to each grocery store for property on the shelf as to where it is on the shelf, how high on the shelf, and at eye level, that's where all the big money goes. And you need to be aware of that. You need to be shopping low, as a friend of mine in the grocery business once said, because that's where the less expensive stuff is. You got to reach down, bend over, and get it. That the expensive stuff's at eye level, and pay attention. I have a relative who's a chef, and she says, you know, pay attention to what day it is when you're looking at the specials. If it's Tuesday and it's a fish special, the odds are that was something they were hawking on Saturday night and they didn't get rid of all of them. And you might not want the fish on Tuesday night, was her observation. But yeah, pay attention to those kinds of things, to limited time offers. And remember that ultimately, the best power you have in this game is the ability to say no, to stop. If you're engaged in a one-on-one sales conversation with someone where they're trying to sell you windows or a car or a heating and air conditioning system, you have the power to say, no, I'm not ready to make this decision at this moment. And to close the conversation, that power is yours. They're at your mercy. The more openings you give them to hang around and keep throwing stuff at you to try and get you to sign today on a deal that may not be the best deal, the more they're just going to hang around. They're just going to keep pecking on you. If you don't say, no, I'm done with this conversation now, I'm not going any further, we can revisit it. And they say, oh, I'm sorry, this deal's only good for today, then, well, then I guess I'm going to have to pass up the deal until I'm sure this is the right decision for me. So go slowly, plan to purchase, do your homework. My wife will tell you, I read Consumer Reports every month. It's an annual Christmas gift from my brother to me, and I faithfully read it. And most of the time, they're right. I want to know where the good products are, and I want to know the products that are more likely to fail. I am willing sometimes to spend more for a product if it's genuinely a better product of higher quality that will last longer and better serve my needs. Cheapest is not always the best, but most expensive does not always equate to what's necessary. And so you do the homework, you do the thinking about it, and be prepared to engage in an intelligent conversation. The internet has driven most car salesmen crazy because you can, with very little effort, you can find out what that dealer really paid for that vehicle, what they really paid for it, not what they're telling you they paid for it. Not the dealer's invoice that they're showing you, because they're not showing you the floor plan kickback and all the other pieces of enticement that the manufacturer offers the dealer. You can find out what the thing really costs, and then you can make an intelligent position on which to negotiate. And you do have to learn to walk away. No matter how much you might want something, if it's not something that's a matter of life and death in this moment, you need to be able to say no and simply walk away. Nothing motivates a car salesman to start to talk deal, I have found, than simply turning around and walking out. They will chase you if they think you're interested in buying the car, and they will begin to talk turkey. But you got to learn how to say no. This is a personal self-discipline. Setting up our budget doesn't work if we don't have these fundamental things in place. So now we come to the budget itself. Now we begin to talk turkey, if you will. And what I want to tell you is that it starts with a very simple process, and unfortunately, this side of talking about income doesn't take near as long as talking about expense. That's just a reality. But what we're going to do is we're going to list our income, all of our regular income. What is it that comes into us every single month? And that includes your paycheck, any stocks or dividends you have, if you're getting child support or spousal support, whatever, you know, if you've got somebody in the family who's contributing to you from a trust or whatever's regular income, you want to list all of that and know exactly how much that is. Because that's the do not exceed limit. That's the do not pass go. Do not collect more than $200 here in the Monopoly game. You know, this is the important stop sign number. Not what you think you're going to get, not what you anticipate getting if you just close that deal. This is the hard and fast. This is what we got every month to work with, because those other things are variables we can't control. Then we got to go to the expense side. And so if you own your home, it's your house payment. If you don't own your home, it's your rent. If you own your home, next on the list should be your homeowner's insurance. The bank will not let you have a mortgage if you don't have the house insured, so you know that's an expense. And if you're renting, you should have renter's insurance to protect the things that you have accumulated in your home. Then you got to figure out what your property taxes are. Part of keeping the house is you got to pay the taxes. Government takes a dim view of you failing to pay those. And then you got to put at least some money aside for maintenance on the home. And if you live in a place where there's a homeowners association, those dues should be included in that. So that, for me, is line item number one on the expense side. If I have a line of credit or if I have debt in another form, maybe a credit card that I'm paying off, I need to list that next, because making that payment is pretty important, or I'm going to pay a hefty fine, penalties, and more interest. And that includes student loans, educational loans you may have, a second mortgage on the house. Things where if you don't pay them, there's a very severe penalty, including the possibility of losing the prime investment These things you have to list near the top. Your transportation costs, if you own a car, and again, insurance, gasoline, maintenance, those are important expenses of owning the car. When you go to buy a car, it's not just the car payment. I always call my insurance agent. My insurance agent will tell you when I'm looking to buy a new car, and I'll say, Joey, can you tell me what the insurance on a 2010 Prius 4 is? Because I want to know how that's going to affect my outgo and if I can afford it. Because maybe I can afford the car, but I can't afford to maintain it and to insure it. That's all a part of what I consider the car payment. It's more than what I'm paying the dealer for what I didn't have cash to put down on the car. And then in this top group are utilities. The gas, the water, the electric, the sewer, the trash, those essential. Now, I'm not talking cable and phone yet. What I'm talking now are the essential things. Remember, we're making a priority budget. These are the things we got to pay for first before we can add other things. And how much do I realistically need to eat and feed my family? And depending on my family size, that's an issue. How many hundreds of dollars a month, and it's usually hundreds of dollars, does it take to have milk, eggs, and bread, and spaghetti, and macaroni and cheese, and tomato soup, and those things in the house that we need to function with? And then life insurance and health insurance. And unfortunately, health insurance has to become more of a priority than even life insurance. In my book, that health insurance is exceedingly important because I cannot predict 5 minutes from now. And I need to be sure that an illness or an accident that causes bodily harm does not bankrupt my family. And so I've got to be prepared to deal with that and have some kind of health insurance, even if it's just catastrophic health insurance. And if you're young, that's not as expensive as when you get to be my age and you've had birthdays with zeros and fives after them for a number of years, and you still have family beside yourself and your spouse. Child care, if you've got a young family, that's got to factor in if you're paying for it. And clothing, because you're probably going to work, and if you have uniform expense, you may not have a uniform allowance, and keeping that stuff clean. And then self-care. I do need to go to the doctor and the dentist, and please don't deny yourself when you're ill going to the physician, and when you go to the dentist once a year. Don't wait for a problem to happen there, because then the costs can be much greater than if you'd just done periodic maintenance on your teeth. Your toiletries, your cosmetics, hair care, those kinds of things are all a part of that group of self-care expenses. And now maybe we get into dues and memberships of organizations we belong to, and the cable bill and the phone bill. We might have a house phone, we might have a cell phone, we may have both, we may only really need one anymore. And you need to decide how much is too much to be spending on that. But right now we're just listing what we currently spend. What do we spend on entertainment and our allowance? Golf is not cheap. So what do I pay for my golf membership, which makes it cheaper than paying for me individual rounds? We like a family vacation once a year. We love to go to the beach. Unfortunately, some years we haven't been able to go because we weren't able to set aside enough money to make that venture and not put ourselves deeper in debt. So if I want to go on a nice vacation, I got to be setting money aside, and that's different from my savings, that's different from my pension, and that's different from my emergency fund. Gifts, anniversaries, birthdays, your fund money. You begin to see now how we're building the list. And don't forget your charitable contributions. I would argue, as I said earlier, they should be really at the top of the list. And they should represent a portion of your income. And you should give proportionately, is my understanding of what we're called to do. You may not be at a place where you can give 10%. That's okay, as long as you're committed to growing to it and you have a discipline of giving regularly. and a commitment to grow in that regular giving. But that should be on the list. That savings account should be savings to build wealth, which you may be part of it investing. And then I mentioned an emergency fund. The best financial experts say, and I can tell you at this moment I'm not there, I'm getting closer, but I'm not there, is that you should have 90 to 120 days in a fund, 90 to 120 days of your monthly expenses set aside in a fund aside from all your other savings. That's very important. You know, Proverbs 21 says, precious treasure remains in the house of the wise, but the fool devours it. So very important for us to pay attention to those things. So when you do your budget, here's what you're going to discover. We're going to put one up on the screen that talks about your expense and your income. And we're going to base this on a take-home pay, take-home, not you know gross, take-home pay of $60,000 a year, because I like even numbers to work with, because that's $5,000 a month. It's $2,308 every 2 weeks. And so we're going to assume that that's our income. Now, if you are clergy or self-employed, you know that this is not your take-home number, that if this is what you take in a year, you still have tax obligations to pay, and you have to pay quarterly taxes, and you have to pay the self-employment tax rate for your Social Security on your income. That is a much higher rate. It's over 15% because you don't have an employer match, and the IRS takes a dim view if you don't pay them annually. In fact, if you don't pay them quarterly. And so if you're a clergy person, then another line item you have to add here is your taxes, to have an understanding of what that tax rate is. And that you're setting aside quarterly an amount to send them, and I always like to have a little bit in reserve in case I've underestimated. That has to be in your calculations. I don't show it in here, but you need to show this if you are a clergy or self-employed person. Then, you know, so we got our housing, and let's say our mortgage is $1,500 a month. So that means if we get paid every 2 weeks, that the first $692 of our paycheck goes to our house payment. Let's say our insurance, if we don't have our insurance and taxes rolled into our mortgage payment, which anymore many of us don't, let's say our insurance on our house is $950 a year. It's due, in my case, it's due in April. It means that I got to set $79 a month or $36 out of every paycheck aside, so that when that bill comes due next April, I have the money in hand and I'm ready to make the payment. You see, you're saying, well, that just is once a year. Well, it's got to come out of what I make now. And for those kinds of things that are due every 6 months or every 12 months, you need to be setting money aside out of every paycheck, at least on paper, putting it in the savings account and knowing that, well, you know, $79 a month of what I'm putting into savings is really insurance, and I can't spend that on something else because I want to have the money available to transfer to my checking account to have that electronically debited by my insurance company on the day that it's due. So that goes with your property tax. Say that's $3,600 a year. That's $300 a month. That's $138 a pay. I only have to pay my property tax twice a year. But out of every paycheck, my wife and I set aside money in a savings account to make that payment as an escrow. We just set it aside. It's designated for that purpose. And then when the tax bill comes, we're not scrambling to look for money. I've done that before. That's no fun. Even my homeowners association do. It's $150 a year, but $6 out of every paycheck goes into that escrow. So when that comes due, that $150 check doesn't faze me. The money's right there. You know, how much is your car payment? If your car payment's $425 a month, which is these days not a big car payment, unfortunately, that's $5,100 a year. That's $196 out of every biweekly pay. So you got to be prepared for that. Your car insurance may only come due once a year. If you got kids that are driving, you know, you may not be able to only pay it once a year. You may need to be paying it once a month. But if you're paying it once a year, say it's $700, that's $58 a month. That's $27 a pay. Figure you're going to spend about $1,000 for my car. I figure about $1,000 a year for gas and oil. In my budget, I got to be prepared for that. You know, tire rotations and the periodic maintenance that has to be done on the car to keep it running well, because that saves me money down the road. So that's $40 a pay, I've figured, for that cost. You begin to see the money's going out pretty fast. Because if my utilities are $184 on the budget pay for electric, $100 for gas, $100 for water and sewer, and $35 for trash, well, that's another $85, another $92, and another $16 I got to set aside to pay those out of every paycheck. I combined the water, gas, and sewer there because they were $46 apiece. And then my food. If you got a couple of growing boys in your house, like I did, it was about $650 a month for food. That's $300 out of that every 2-week pay. Now that money's starting to go fast, and if I'm paying for my own health insurance, well, I figured here $2,400 a year, that's nothing, right? I mean, that's, that's absolutely catastrophic healthcare insurance. You know, most insurance for folks in my age bracket with children still on the policy runs closer to 20 grand a year. But I got to have money set aside for that. I've just taken a number here because maybe you contribute to your health insurance and your employer is paying a portion of it. Your self-care, and I'm talking there again about the dentist and the doctor and those kinds of things. I want to save. I want to give money away. So now I've taken another, you know, $92 for health, $92 for self-care, $115 for savings, $115 for charity. And suddenly, out of that $2 grand I had, I was getting every 2 weeks, I've only got $268 left. That doesn't give me a lot of room left. That's another $570 a month, and I haven't paid for a cell phone plan, a cable plan, a home phone, a home maintenance contract. I don't have any mad money in my pocket. I haven't paid my kids' tuition for private school or college. I haven't paid life insurance. I haven't bought any clothes, paid any dues. I haven't spent money on entertainment to go out to eat. I haven't dry cleaned the clothes yet, gone on vacation. You see, all those other things got to come out of what's left. And suddenly, you know, the 5.0 cable plan that's, you know, downloading stuff to me like T1's fast, and the cell phone plan with 10, you know, gigabytes of data on it, and 14 phones, and all of them are smartphones, and, you know, half a dozen iPads in the family. Maybe I can't afford all of that. You see? There's no magic number here. I wish I could tell you that, you know, you can, there's a way to have it all. You don't have to make any decisions and priorities. You can just go buy what you want And if you do this math right, somehow you'll have enough at the end of the month. It's not true. Madison Avenue is trying hard to convince us that we can do that. And so lots of us have bought a lot of stuff we didn't need with money we didn't have, and the bills have come due, and we've probably thrown some of those things out. And we're not only paying for them, but we're paying interest on them. And life's suddenly gotten a lot harder. So, golly, you need to know exactly how much you have. And before you go buy that new cell plan or that new dishwasher, washing machine, or, you know, short of needing things in an emergency where you may be kind of between a rock and a hard place. And I've known folks who've washed dishes for a while rather than replace a dishwasher. You know, you got to make decisions. Then there's the issue of debt reduction. Mentioned before, you have to pay your credit cards. And you may need to seek help. Let's be honest, the average American household that had credit card debt had over $12,500 of it at over 22% in the summer of 2011. I can only guess those numbers have gone up. You need maybe to get some help with somebody who can help consolidate. Maybe if you own your home and have enough equity in it, you would be eligible and your bank would entertain the idea of some kind of consolidation loan. But you got to be careful with those. But you've got to develop a plan to manage the debt you have already accumulated. There's a couple of strategies on this, and we're all different, and so different things work for different people. I kind of like to have a quick victory, and so I suggest taking the credit card you have the smallest balance on and begin to, you know, first of all, don't make any more charges on those credit cards, any of them if you can avoid it. And you got to stop charging as quickly as you can. And then I want to pay down that small balance first. Let's say I have 4 different cards with balances on them. For me, I want to get the quick victory, so I want to pay down that one with the small balance first, and then I want to tackle the one with the highest interest. It may or may not be the biggest balance, but the one that, you know, if I'm spending $80 a month in interest, that's, golly, $960 a year in interest. That's not helping me pay down the debt. It's just interest on what I've borrowed. So if I can knock that thing down and have that $80 a month then to put toward the next credit card as soon as I have this one paid off, you see the advantage to that? But to do that, I got to make choices. And again, you know, my car, my cell phone, my cable plan, whether or not I go out to eat for lunch or how often I go out to eat for dinner. These are places where I can make choices to cut back my expenses and rein in, you know, the runaway money and start focusing it and channeling it in the things I need to do to get out of debt, and then to reorder my household and save so that I have the capacity to be generous. I have the capacity to experience transformation and joy in my giving and see that at work in the world around me. Be wary of debt settlement offers. Do some homework on those who are offering to make quick debt settlement and put you into one small payment. They might very well work for the credit card companies you're trying to get yourself out of hock with. And the deal they're offering you over the long term may not be that good. So get sound, trusted financial advice. In some cases, you may need to negotiate a settlement with a credit card. It may just be so out of whack and the interest so high and the overage that you've gone on your credit limit so great that you simply need to negotiate a settlement. Yes, that does hurt your credit rating, but it can stop the bleeding, and it can help you get that debt managed. You got to remember that when you go to do these things, if you find yourself in heavy debt, that you got to keep your emotions out of the process, because the reality is the people who are collecting this debt, they don't really care. That's not their job to care. They don't get paid for caring. They get paid for collecting. And they get so much on the dollar. So every dollar they can get from you, they want to get. They may sound nice and sweet, but the reality is they want to get as much out of you in the settlement as they possibly can. And they really don't, you owe the money. They don't care that your grandmother was sick and you had to take off work to take care of her, or that your kids were sick, that you got laid off, that the plant closed, that your car broke down, and these folks, they don't care about that. It's not their job to care. And so you've got to keep emotions out of the process, and your own emotions out of the process, and recognize this is an obligation and it needs to be met. It is part of ordering the chaos and getting it under control. But do seek help if you find yourself in that setting. It is not hopeless. It may take a long time to get to where you can do all of these recommended things. It may be a while before you're really able to save while you're paying down credit card debt. But the sooner you get rid of $400, $500, $600, $800 a month payments, some of that, maybe 20% of that being interest, the sooner you'll be able to save, the sooner you'll be able to have an emergency fund, the sooner you'll be able to have the right insurance. And you know what the goals are, and you've got the priorities set up. And so now you begin to work the plan. And yes, maybe you take the bus more often. Maybe you pack a ham sandwich for lunch. Maybe you settle for, what you can get over the air on your television and those 5 local channels for a while. Not forever, but for a while. Maybe you don't replace your television with that new high-def plasma 64-inch beauty that you love to have hanging on your wall. You're just going to have to wait for some of those things. That's the difficult news. But the good news is that if you get this in order and you get your household figured out and how to manage it, obviously the sooner the better. If you get it done before you're spiraled out of control, you'll realize that peace and the quiet and reduce the anxiety much quicker. But if you're working a plan, it will begin to quiet that anxiety. If you really have it figured out and you know what your necessities and your needs are over and against what your wants and what you want to have and desire, your life will be a lot better. Look for where you can find the money. Clip coupons. It's not the end of the world to clip coupons. It's not the end of the world to not get the newspaper anymore for a while, or the Golf Digest or Time or whatever it is that you take at your home. Those are kind of going by the wayside anyway, but if you're getting them on your iPad or your e-reader, you're still paying a subscription fee. Maybe you don't have to have a Starbucks even once a week for a while as a way of beginning to get that under control. You got to stop spending on the things that are not essential. The sooner you can get yourself cash only, the better it will be. And that may even mean doing things like turning the thermostat down in the house and putting on a sweater, or being willing to be in a t-shirt and run the ceiling fans as opposed to the air conditioner in the summertime. Don't ignore the debt you have. Don't ignore the creditors who are calling. You've got to negotiate and get a settlement and plan, and you got to stop spending in those areas that are bankrupting you. If you do this, you will eventually have a happier life. The decision to not have things you want will be difficult and may make you a little bit sour for a while. But I promise you, if you will do these things, it will reduce your anxiety, increase your peace, increase your capacity to be generous, and make your home and your life a more peaceful and desirable place. Conventional wisdom says failure to plan is planning to fail. So get a budget, get a plan, understand your money, and begin to work it. Ronald Reagan said we might come closer to balancing the budget if all of us lived closer to the commandments and the golden rule, which is about what's ultimately important. So think about those things. Practice those things. Contact us at the Center for Faith and Giving if you need resources, if you need help. And we wish you the absolute best on your journey. Remember what Hildebrand said, money is like love. It kills slowly and painfully the one who withholds it, and it enlivens the other who turns it on his fellow man. So that's our goal, is to be able to have enough to share with others from the abundance we have received. Blessings.